I've spent the last 20 years trying to explain what happened to us in those woods, and I've learned that most people don't want to hear about it. They want a ghost story they can file away neatly in their minds, something with a clear villain and a resolution that makes sense. This isn't that story. This is something worse, because it sits in the space where you can't quite convince yourself it's impossible, no matter how hard you try. I grew up in Appalachia, and I've heard every legend this region has to offer. I've listened to stories about things that move wrong in the dark, about places where the air tastes like copper and ash, about families that disappear and leave nothing behind but a cold spot on the ground that never quite warms up again. But those are stories people tell. They're comfortable because they exist at a distance. What I'm about to tell you happened to me. It happened to 3 other boys I knew, and one of them didn't come back the same way he went in. There's a specific kind of dread that comes from Appalachian horror. It's not the theatrical fear you get from a movie or the adrenaline spike of a jump scare. It's something quieter and more insidious. It's the feeling you get when you're walking through your house at 3 in the morning, and you know something is wrong, but you can't articulate why. It's the loneliness of a hollow that seems to swallow sound. It's the certainty that you're being observed by something that doesn't blink. If you've ever felt that particular flavor of unease, you might recognize it in what I'm about to describe. And if you do, you may feel it again as I tell you this. I'm not going to pretend I have all the answers. I'm going to tell you what happened as accurately as my memory allows, and I'm going to be honest about the gaps. There are things I still don't understand. There are moments from that fall that I've questioned so many times that I'm no longer certain what I actually witnessed and what my mind has constructed in the decades since. But there's one thing I know for absolute certain. Something was wrong in those woods. Something still is. I've changed some names to protect people who don't deserve to have their lives turned into a cautionary tale. The town is real. The woods are real. The mystery we were trying to solve in 1998 was real, and it still hasn't been solved. What we found out there, what we woke up out there, had been waiting in that darkness for 46 years. When I was a kid, I thought I understood fear. I thought I understood the dark. I was wrong about both of those things. Fear is a luxury when you're young because you haven't yet learned that some things are worse than being scared. Some things are just wrong in a way that your brain can't quite process. Some things leave you standing in broad daylight years later, feeling like something is still watching you from the corner of your vision. This story made me understand that. This happened in the fall of 1998. I was 13 years old, and it started in a town called Harland, Kentucky, in a place that locals had stopped going to a long time before we decided to go there ourselves. Harland, Kentucky in 1998 was the kind of place where everybody knew your business before you did. Population 2,847, though that number felt generous. The kind of town where the biggest event of the year was the county fair in August, and the rest of the time you made your own entertainment or you went insane. The mountains pressed in from all sides, beautiful and suffocating at the same time. Cell phones existed, but they didn't work out there. Nobody thought that mattered yet. Tyler's house sat on the edge of town, a 2-story colonial with a driveway long enough that his parents could pretend they didn't live in Harland at all. His dad was something in Louisville. His mom did yoga and wore sunglasses indoors. That Friday in October, they were heading to some resort in Tennessee for the weekend, leaving Tyler with money, a full pantry, and explicit instructions not to have anyone over. Tyler had smiled and nodded and immediately called us. I got there first. Josh was already in Tyler's garage, bouncing a basketball off the concrete floor with the kind of aggressive energy he always carried. Nothing scared Josh. That's what we used to think. He'd been suspended twice in 7th grade for fighting, and both times he'd come back like it was nothing. He had this scar above his left eyebrow from some middle school incident nobody could quite agree on the details of. Different story depending on who told it. That was Josh, though. The kind of guy who made you wonder what was true and what he'd just decided to claim. Kyle showed up on his beat-up mountain bike, the one he'd assembled from parts he found behind the hardware store. He was thin in a way that suggested his mom's double shifts at the hospital, and the convenience store didn't leave much room for regular meals, but his eyes were sharp. Kyle read everything. He spent his free time at the library, and not because he was studying. He just liked knowing things, weird things, old things, the kind of stuff that didn't really matter, but somehow he'd made it matter anyway. Tyler's parents are gone, I said, stating the obvious because that's what you do when you're nervous. I know, Tyler said, coming down from his room. He was already thinking about the logistics, I could tell. Tyler always was. He had this way of organizing chaos into something manageable. We're leaving tomorrow morning, early. I've got everything packed. Josh caught the basketball and held it against his chest. Where are we going again? Barlo Hollow, Tyler said. Up through the national forest. There's a creek up there. Kyle says it's good for camping. That was the way Tyler had phrased it to me when he called, like it was just a casual thing, just a camping trip. But there was something in his voice that suggested he'd already decided this was happening, and we were just going to follow along because that's what we did. Tyler led. We followed. It was never stated that way, but it was understood. My boots are already in my pack, Kyle said quietly. He was sitting on the edge of Tyler's garage workbench, swinging his legs. I've got them ready. I remember thinking that was weird. Keeping your boots in your pack inside your sleeping bag. Kyle was cautious, though. Paranoid, Josh used to say, but not in a mean way. Just observational. Kyle prepared for things, like he expected something to go wrong and wanted to be ready when it did. When Tyler first brought up the idea of camping in Barlo Hollow, none of us knew what we were getting into. But Kyle did. Kyle had been doing research. Kyle pulled out a manila folder that had been sitting on his lap the whole time. Inside were photocopies of newspaper articles, their edges yellowed and text faded from age. He spread them across Tyler's kitchen table like evidence at a crime scene. October 15th, 1952, Kyle said, pointing to the first article. Sarah and Mary Barlow disappeared from their home in Barlo Hollow, 12 years old, twins. Their father was Vernon Barlow. I leaned in closer. The photograph showed two girls with identical dark hair and solemn expressions, the kind of school portrait that always looked slightly haunted. Below them was a picture of a man with hollow eyes and a thin mouth. They went missing on a Saturday afternoon, Kyle continued, his voice taking on that quality it got when he was reciting something he'd memorized. Walked out the back door to play in the woods. Never came back. Search parties went out for 2 weeks straight. Nothing. No bodies, no clothing, no sign of them anywhere. Josh shifted his weight. Maybe they just ran away. In 1952, Appalachia? Kyle shook his head. 12-year-old girls didn't just disappear and start new lives somewhere else. People knew where they were or they didn't. The town knew they didn't know. He pulled out another article. 3 months later, Vernon Barlow was found hanging from a white oak tree about a quarter mile from his house. They found a note in his pocket. The silence that followed was the kind that makes you aware of your own breathing. What did it say? Ryan asked. Kyle read from a photocopy of the original note, his voice steady but careful. I didn't hurt them, and I'm sorry I could not find them. Something about that sentence made my skin feel too tight. Not a confession, not a denial exactly either, just a man saying he hadn't done it and that he'd failed to bring his daughters home. The town didn't believe him, Kyle said. They thought he killed them and buried them somewhere in those woods. That's why he killed himself. Guilt, shame. The whole town turned on him after the girls disappeared. Nobody would talk to him. Nobody would help him look. By the time he died, he was already a ghost. Josh was quiet now, too. Even Josh understood the weight of that kind of abandonment. But here's what I found, Kyle said, pulling out more documents. Police records from 1952. They searched those woods thoroughly. They dug. They dragged. They did everything you do when you're looking for bodies. They found nothing. And there's no evidence Vernon ever hurt those girls. No witnesses, no motive, nothing. Mrs. Keir's voice came back to me then, the way she'd looked at Kyle in the library when he'd asked about the hollow. My brother went camping up there in 1977, Kyle said, and I realized he must have talked to Mrs. Keir too. He said he heard things, voices that sounded like children. He said the other people in his group all got sick at the same time. High fever, couldn't move. They had to leave in the middle of the night. Mrs. Keir said he wouldn't go back there. Not ever. That doesn't prove anything, Josh said, but his voice was smaller now. No, Kyle agreed. But there's a pattern, Halloween. That's when most of the incidents happen, 1952, 1977. There are documented cases in 1985, 1993, 2001. Always around Halloween, always people going missing or getting sick or seeing things they can't explain. Tyler had been quiet through all of this, studying the photocopies. "You think something's out there?" "I think something in those woods took those girls," Kyle said, "and I think it's still there. I think it might even be looking for replacements." The words hung in the air between us like a challenge and a warning at the same time. We met at Tyler's house at 3 o'clock. His parents were leaving for his aunt's in Cincinnati, which meant we had the place to ourselves for the entire weekend. Melissa barely looked up from her phone when we started hauling stuff into the garage. She didn't care where we were going or what we were doing. That was the thing about having an older sister. Once you hit a certain age, you became invisible to them. The gear was spread across Tyler's garage floor like we were planning an actual expedition. 2 tents, 4 sleeping bags, a camp stove, enough food to last 3 days, water bottles, flashlights, rope, and a first aid kit that Josh had insisted on bringing. Kyle kept his boots on inside his sleeping bag, which struck me as weird until I realized what it meant. He was ready to run. He was ready to leave in the middle of the night if things went wrong. We loaded everything into our backpacks. Tyler checked his watch, 4:15. We had about 2 hours of solid daylight if we moved fast. The trail was only 2 miles to the clearing, but 2 miles through Appalachian forest isn't like hiking on a maintained path. The woods reclaim everything out here. The bike ride to the trailhead took 15 minutes. We pedaled hard, not talking much, just focused on the road ahead. When we got there, we hid the bikes in a cluster of rhododendron bushes, deep enough that nobody would find them unless they were looking. Then we shouldered our packs and stepped onto the trail. The first mile felt normal, physical. My legs burned. My lungs worked hard in the cool air. Josh was ahead, moving fast, his energy pushing us forward. Kyle stayed close to me, constantly scanning the tree line like he was counting the distance we'd traveled, measuring how far we were from the road. Tyler brought up the rear, checking his GPS, making sure we were on track. But somewhere around the second mile, the woods changed. I noticed it first in the light. The sun was still above the horizon, but the shadows under the trees were getting thick and dark in a way that didn't match the time of day. The temperature dropped too, not gradually. It was like we'd crossed an invisible line where the air got cold, the trail narrowed, the forest pressed in tighter. Trees grew closer together, branches interlocking overhead, filtering what little light remained. The smell of earth and old leaves got stronger, almost overwhelming. I could hear our boots on the path, the creak of our backpacks, the sound of our breathing, but I couldn't hear birds anymore. That's when I realized I hadn't heard birds for the last half mile. Kyle pointed to something on our left, the foundation, a collapsed stone structure, barely recognizable as a building. Charred wood was still visible in places, blackened by a fire that had burned 58 years ago. The Barlo family homestead. We were looking at the exact place where Vernon had died. The clearing opened up ahead of us. Tyler checked his watch, 6 o'clock exactly. The light was almost gone now, just a faint grayness above the trees. We found the old fire pit immediately, a ring of blackened rocks with ash still in the center. Someone had been here recently. The ash looked fresh. We set up the tent quickly, working without talking much. The fire started easier than I expected, which felt good. We organized our supplies, opened cans of food, drank water. The fire crackled and threw shadows across our faces. We were hungry. We were excited. We were as deep into Barlo Hollow as we could possibly be. By the time we got everything settled, darkness had fallen completely. We boiled water on the camp stove and made ramen, the steam rising into the cold air. Tyler passed around the pot and we ate straight from it, burning our mouths because we were too hungry to wait. Josh cracked jokes about the food tasting like dirty socks, and for a while it felt normal. We were just 4 guys camping in the woods. The fire kept us warm. The darkness stayed outside our circle of light. Tyler asked Kyle about the girls while we ate, his tone casual, but his eyes serious. What exactly happened to them? Kyle stared into the fire for a long moment before answering. No one knew for sure. They went into the woods with some boys from town. They never came back. Search parties found nothing. No bodies, no clothing, no trace. Just gone. Tyler pressed. Murder? Kyle shook his head. Vernon's note didn't read like guilt. It read like loss, like something was taken from him, something he couldn't explain. Josh laughed, said it was probably just some old pervert story, made up to scare kids. People disappeared all the time back then. Accidents happened. But even as he said it, His voice sounded less confident. Kyle mentioned something about the note again. Vernon wrote about hearing them singing. That's what he said in the letter. They were singing, still singing even after they were gone. What could cause something like that? Tyler asked. What could make two girls just vanish without a trace? Kyle didn't answer. He just poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks up into the darkness above us. The darkness beyond our fire had become absolute. There was no moon, no stars visible through the heavy canopy, just black, complete and total. The cold was pressing against us now, the kind of cold that makes you aware of every edge where the firelight stops. I could feel it on my neck, on my exposed skin, waiting just beyond the warmth. That's when we heard it. Faint, distant, coming from somewhere deep in the woods beyond the clearing, singing. Two voices, high and thin, harmonizing together. The sound was so far away at first that I almost thought I'd imagined it. I looked at Tyler. He'd heard it too. Josh stopped chewing. Kyle's entire body had gone rigid. The singing got closer, not moving fast, drifting through the trees like it was floating rather than walking. The voices became clearer. They were young voices, children's voices, two girls singing something I almost recognized, some kind of lullaby or nursery rhyme. But the melody was wrong. It was twisted somehow, corrupted, the notes slightly off in a way that made your stomach tighten. Tyler asked if everyone could hear it. We all nodded. It was real. It was there. Kyle's face had changed. He was staring into the darkness where the sound was coming from, his jaw clenched. I asked him what it was. He said those were the voices. Those were the girls. Emily and Sarah. He recognized them. He knew their voices from school, from seeing them around town before they disappeared in 1966. 58 years ago, and he was hearing them now, singing in the woods above Barlo Hollow, getting closer with every note. The singing rose higher, more distinct, almost on top of us now, and then it stopped, just cut off mid-note. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. Josh shifted next to me. I could hear him breathing. "What the hell was that?" he whispered. Josh said he needed to take a walk, just for a minute. He grabbed the flashlight from beside the fire and stood up, brushing dirt off his jeans with maybe a little too much force. None of us said anything. We all understood what he meant. The woods had gone quiet after the singing stopped, but the quiet felt worse than the sound. It felt like something was listening. Tyler nodded. Josh aimed the flashlight into the darkness and walked about 20 feet from the fire, just far enough that we could still see the edge of his silhouette against the beam. He was trying to maintain some dignity about it. I watched him crouch down behind a thicket of laurel, the flashlight casting wild shadows through the undergrowth. That's when the light started flickering. At first I thought it was just the angle, the beam bouncing as he moved, but then it went out completely. Total darkness where Josh was. I leaned forward. Tyler shifted beside me. The light came back on for maybe 2 seconds, then died again. In that moment of blackness, I heard it, a sound like something heavy moving through the brush, not careful, not slow, fast and deliberate, something crashing through the woods toward where Josh was crouching. Josh screamed, not yelled, screamed, a pure sound of terror that cut through everything else and sent ice through my chest. The flashlight beam whipped around wildly, illuminating nothing but trees and darkness, and then Josh was running. Sprinting back toward us, his breath coming in ragged gasps, the flashlight beam bouncing everywhere at once. He burst into the firelight and collapsed onto a log, his whole body shaking. His hands were trembling so badly he could barely hold the flashlight. I asked him what happened. What the hell happened? Josh didn't answer. He was breathing hard, his jaw clenched, and I could see sweat on his forehead despite the cold. Ryan stood up and asked if he was okay. Josh nodded, but he wasn't okay. His tough exterior had cracked completely. This wasn't about being cool anymore. This was raw fear. "The battery," Josh said. "Flashlight." Battery died. That's all it was. But his hands were still shaking and his voice sounded wrong. Tyler asked him why he sounded like that if it was just a dead battery. Josh didn't answer. He was staring into the darkness beyond the fire, his eyes tracking something we couldn't see. I pressed him. I told him to tell us what actually happened. For a long moment he didn't say anything. Then his voice came out quiet and small, nothing like the Josh who'd been joking around earlier. I felt someone standing behind me, right behind me in the dark. I could feel them there, but when the light came back on, there was nothing there. But I could hear them breathing, wet breathing, like someone with pneumonia or something, all rattly and wrong. And I could feel it on the back of my neck. Actual breath, cold breath. Josh's hands were shaking so badly that the flashlight beam trembled across the ground. Kyle was watching him carefully, and I could see something shift in Kyle's expression. He believed Josh. He knew Josh wasn't lying. "We should get in the tent," I said. "All of us. We can figure this out in the morning. For now, we just need to stay together." Nobody argued. We doused the fire and crawled into the tent, the four of us packed so tight our shoulders were almost touching. The lantern cast weak, trembling light across the nylon walls. Outside, the forest had gone completely silent. Not peaceful silent. The kind of silent that makes you hold your breath without meaning to. Josh kept muttering under his breath, something about being stupid, about what he'd felt out there. His voice was hollow, mechanical. Kyle sat with his boots still on, laced tight, even though he was technically inside his sleeping bag. I noticed that detail and didn't question it. Kyle wasn't the type to leave anything to chance anymore. Ryan was already dozing off, his breathing evening out, his head tilted back against his backpack. The rest of us just lay there, listening to the forest, listening to nothing. Time passed, minutes or hours, I couldn't tell. The lantern burned low, casting everything in a sickly amber glow. I was drifting, that weird half-asleep state where your thoughts start getting strange and disconnected, when I felt it. A presence. Not a sound or a smell, just this weight in the air, like pressure building before a storm. I opened my eyes. She was hanging upside down from the tent ceiling, her face inches from mine. Her hair hung down like a curtain, and I couldn't process for a moment what I was seeing because there was nothing holding her. Nothing. Just her, suspended there in the impossible dark above me. I tried to scream. Nothing came out. My throat had closed completely. I tried to move, to roll away, but my body wouldn't respond. I was paralyzed, every muscle locked, my eyes wide and staring up at her. Her face was the worst part. The left side looked almost normal, pale and slack, but the right side was bone. Actual exposed bone, yellow and pitted, with something dark and wet still clinging to it. Her eyes were black holes. Not dark brown or shadowed, but absolute voids, like looking into nothing, like staring into a space where light went to die. There was no reflection in them. Nothing alive in there at all. She was smiling. That smile was wrong in a way I can't fully explain. It was too wide, too knowing, like she found something hilarious in my terror. Her jaw was broken, tilted at an angle that couldn't be natural, held together by some impossible arrangement of sinew and will. Her teeth were visible through the gap, small and yellowed and wrong, she breathed, and I heard it. A wet clicking sound, like something drowning, like something with fluid in its lungs trying to pull air through. And I could smell her. Dirt and rot and the specific stench of earthworms and decomposition, that thick organic reek of something that had been dead for a very long time. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I couldn't do anything but stare up at that broken face suspended inches above mine, at those black hole eyes that were looking directly at me, seeing me, understanding me in a way nothing should understand anything. She just looked at me. Hanging there, smiling that terrible smile. The wet, clicking sound of her breathing filled the entire tent. Then Josh stirred on the other side. His sleeping bag rustled. I blinked and she was gone. The tent was empty, just the four of us and the dying lantern light. Josh whispered into the darkness, "What's going on?" My voice came out hoarse, barely recognizable. "We need to stay awake. We need to stay alert." We decided on watch shifts. 2 awake, 2 sleeping, rotating every 90 minutes. Josh and Ryan took first watch at 11:47. They sat back-to-back near the lantern, facing opposite directions into the darkness beyond the tent flaps. The shadows they cast were enormous and distorted, stretched and mutated by the dying light. Every sound made them flinch, scurrying in the brush, something dragging across the forest floor 30 feet away. It never came closer, but it never fully stopped either. Just that constant, patient scraping in the dark. At 1:30 they woke Tyler and me. I was barely conscious, pulled from a sleep so deep it felt like drowning. Ryan's eyes were red-rimmed, his hands shaking. Josh looked like he hadn't aged well in the last few hours. They collapsed into their sleeping bags almost immediately. Ryan was asleep within seconds, but his sleep was fractured and broken. I could hear him whimpering, his body twitching as nightmares worked through him. His hand kept reaching out, grasping at nothing. I don't know how long I was actually awake, maybe 20 minutes, maybe less. Time felt strange that night, elastic and unreliable. Kyle was sitting at the tent opening, keeping watch. I was drifting, that space between sleeping and waking where nothing feels quite real. Then Kyle shook me hard. "Tyler's gone," he whispered. I came awake instantly. Tyler's sleeping bag was empty, the tent flap unzipped. Not torn, unzipped from the inside. I looked at Kyle. "How did he leave?" Kyle shook his head. "He was here 5 minutes ago. I don't know how. He just wasn't here anymore." We scrambled out of the tent into the darkness. The fire had burned down to ash. Only moonlight remained, pale and weak and wrong. That's when we heard it. A strangled choking sound from somewhere up the slope, maybe 50 yards away. We didn't think. We just ran toward it. We found Tyler hanging from a thick oak branch, a vine wrapped around his neck like a noose. His feet were dangling 2 feet off the ground. His face was purple, swollen and dark, his eyes bulging out like something was trying to force them from his skull. His hands were clawing at the vine, fingernails broken and bleeding. Josh didn't hesitate. He grabbed Tyler's legs and lifted with everything he had, creating slack in the vine. Ryan pulled his knife from his pack and started sawing at the vine. It was thick, fibrous, resistant. For a moment nothing happened. Then it snapped. Tyler and Josh crashed to the ground together, a tangle of limbs in desperation. Tyler was gasping, his whole body convulsing, his hands at his throat. There was a deep groove in the flesh where the vine had cut in, dark and raw. We waited for him to be able to speak. 2 minutes, maybe 3. It felt like an hour. When he finally could talk, his voice was destroyed, barely audible. He said he didn't remember leaving the tent. Someone had called his name. It sounded like Josh. Half asleep, confused, he'd gone outside to answer. Immediately, he was lost. The clearing was gone. The trees were wrong. Then he felt something around his neck. The vine was already tight, already choking him, and then it tightened more. "It lifted me up," he whispered. "On its own, like a rope over a pulley. It pulled me up." Josh said that wasn't possible. That was insane. That was impossible. But Tyler just looked at him with those bulging, traumatized eyes and said, "I felt it. It was there. It's real. It lifted me up on its own." We started back toward the clearing, Tyler leaning heavily on Josh. But something was wrong. The ground felt different. The trees looked unfamiliar. Josh stopped. "Which way is the clearing?" he asked. We made it maybe 50 yards before Josh stopped. "Which way is the clearing?" he asked. Nobody answered because nobody knew. The ground should have been sloping downward. We'd come from higher elevation, and the camp was in a depression near the creek. But the earth beneath our feet stayed level, perfectly level. We kept walking what we thought was the right direction, and the terrain never changed. Ryan checked his watch. "We ran from the camp maybe 2 minutes," he said, "so this walk should take 5. We walked for 10 minutes and found ourselves back at the fire pit. The tent was still there, our gear untouched, the embers of the fire still glowing. Josh stared at the clearing like it might explain itself. "That's not possible," he said. "We were going away from here. We were definitely going away." Kyle pulled out the compass. His hand was shaking. The needle was bouncing, spinning in loose circles like it couldn't decide what north was. He tapped the face. The needle kept dancing. "It's like there's a big magnet nearby," he said, "or something's interfering with it, something strong enough to break a compass." We stood there in the moonlight, the 4 of us, and nobody wanted to say what we were all thinking. The woods had turned us around, not confused us, turned us, like we were on a string being reeled back in. Josh's voice was quiet when he spoke. "What if this is what happened to Vernon Barlow? What if he tried to leave and the woods wouldn't let him?" Kyle nodded slowly. "The woods confused him," Kyle said, "made him walk in circles. Maybe the woods didn't want him to find his daughters. Maybe it wanted him to stay." Tyler's voice was raw, destroyed from the vine. "The woods don't just take people," he said. "That's insane." Kyle looked at him with something ancient in his eyes. "It feels like someone or something doesn't want us to leave," he said. "And it's getting stronger. Or closer. Or both." That's when we heard it. Singing, 2 voices high and thin like children. The melody was a lullaby but wrong. The notes bent and twisted into something that made your teeth ache. The voices were coming from the edge of the clearing, from the tree line itself. We all went still. The singing continued for maybe 30 seconds. Then it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. It felt active, waiting. Josh whispered something. Oh, God. At the tree line, two small figures had appeared. They were swaying, moving like they were dancing to music only they could hear. The moonlight caught them in silhouette, small, child-sized, the outline of long hair on one of them. Dresses, maybe, or something that looked like dresses. They didn't move toward us. They just swayed there at the edge of the woods, two dark shapes against the darker trees, moving in that hypnotic rhythm that had nothing to do with any music playing now. Josh put his hand on his knife. Tyler leaned against him, his breathing shallow and ragged. Ryan was backing toward the tent. Kyle was still holding the compass, watching the needle spin uselessly. The figures at the tree line didn't move. They didn't need to. They were already inside the camp. The camp was inside the woods. The woods was inside us. And nothing we did made any difference anymore. Let's just get in the tent, I said. Maybe things will make more sense in the morning. Maybe we can figure out a way out. Tyler didn't argue. None of us did. We went back to the tent and zipped ourselves inside, trying not to think about what was waiting just beyond the nylon walls. Ryan was asleep, his face twisted in the kind of nightmare sleep where your muscles twitch and your breathing goes shallow. I could see his eyes moving beneath closed lids, watching something terrible in whatever hell his mind had constructed. I wasn't sleeping. I'd been sitting up for maybe an hour, staring at the tent wall, listening to the woods breathe around us. That's when I heard it. The dragging sound, wet, close, closer than it had any right to be. I shook Ryan hard. His eyes snapped open and he gasped like he was surfacing from water. Do you hear it? I whispered. The dragging continued, moving around the tent perimeter, slow, deliberate, like something being pulled through mud. It circled us, and I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, could feel sweat running down my ribs despite the cold. The sound stopped at the front of the tent. Then came the breathing, heavy, rattling, with this clicking sound underneath it, like teeth chattering or bones knocking together. Right outside the tent flap, I could almost see the breath fogging the nylon from inside. Something pressed against the wall, hard. I watched as the fabric pushed inward, creating an indentation, a shape, an emaciated hand. I could see it clearly in the moonlight filtering through the tent material, skin removed, bone showing, gray-white and horrible. I grabbed Ryan's arm so hard he made a small sound of pain. The zipper started moving, from the outside. One tooth at a time, down, down, the sound of metal sliding through metal, agonizingly slow. Someone was unzipping the tent from outside. Inch by inch, the opening grew wider. I couldn't move. I couldn't do anything but watch as the flap peeled open and the darkness beyond it deepened into something absolute. Then two small hands reached through, molded, gray-black, waterlogged. The fingernails were cracked and broken, and the smell hit me like a physical blow. Rot, earth, earthworms, weeks-old decay, the smell of something that had been buried and was now clawing its way back up. A face appeared in the opening. She was maybe 12 years old. That was the first thing I registered. The impossibility of it. A child. But only half of her was a child. The left side of her face was smooth, pale, normal, dark eyes, almost pretty. The right side was rotted away, bone showing through, skin pulled back like a grin. Her hair was matted, full of leaves and dirt, and she was smiling. Both halves of her face were smiling. Behind her, a second girl. Identical rot, different arrangement. One of her eyes was a black pit. The other was missing entirely, just a hollow socket. Her head was tilted sideways, too far sideways. I heard the soft cracking sound of vertebrae shifting, wet sliding sound underneath it, like flesh moving across exposed bone. Both of them smiling. My breathing started getting faster. I fumbled for my inhaler. My hands were shaking too hard to use it. The first girl was trying to crawl into the tent, her rotted fingers reaching toward me. Ryan screamed, a raw, primal sound. That broke the paralysis. Tyler and Josh jolted awake, and for half a second there was confusion, chaos, everyone trying to figure out what was happening. Then they saw. "Get out!" Ryan screamed. "Run!" We exploded out of that tent like our lives depended on it, which they did. Ryan scrambled backward, tripped over Josh's sleeping bag, kept moving. Tyler was right behind him. Josh was already tearing through the back of the tent, ripping a hole in the nylon big enough to fit through. The cold air hit my face like a slap. I was last out. When I turned back, the tent was thrashing, shaking violently, like animals fighting inside it, like something was tearing it apart from the inside. Then it stopped, just went flat. A pile of nylon and bent rods, no shapes underneath. The girls were gone. "Where's Kyle?" Tyler asked, gasping. I crawled out of the wreckage, breathing hard, my chest tight. My inhaler, I can't find it. Ryan was already moving, crawling under the fabric, his hands searching frantically. He found it, handed it to me. I inhaled, twice, 3 times. The tightness in my chest eased just enough to breathe. "We need to go now," Josh demanded. We didn't argue. We ran without direction, just away. The creek was somewhere to our left, and Kyle kept saying, follow the water downstream. It has to lead somewhere." So we ran toward the sound of it, crashing through brush that tore at our clothes and skin. My lungs were screaming. Behind us, that singing continued, now from the left, now from ahead, now from somewhere we couldn't place. It didn't sound human anymore. It sounded like wind through broken things. "Don't listen," Kyle gasped between breaths. "It wants you to listen. Just keep moving." Josh was half carrying Tyler now, Tyler's neck bent at that wrong angle, his face twisted in pain with every step. I could hear the singing getting closer, or maybe it was just my heart pounding so hard I couldn't tell what was real anymore. We'd been running for what felt like hours. Had to be only 20 or 30 minutes, but time had broken. There was only the dark in the trees and the sound of our feet hitting the forest floor. Then Tyler pointed through the trees ahead. A light. Moving. A flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "Help!" Josh screamed. "We need help!" The light stopped moving. Then it changed direction, swinging toward us, coming fast. A voice called out, gruff and confused. "Who's out here?" A man emerged from the trees, 60 maybe, wearing a camouflage jacket and carrying a hunting rifle. Behind him through the trees, I could see the shape of a truck parked on what looked like an old logging road. The flashlight beam swept across our faces, and I knew what we looked like. 4 kids, bleeding, scratched, wild-eyed, completely unraveled. "Something's been chasing us," Tyler gasped. "In the woods. Something's been chasing us all night." The man swept his flashlight across the trees behind us. Nothing. No movement, no sound. The singing had stopped the moment we saw his light. "We were camping in Barlo Hollow," Josh said, his voice shaking, "and there's something wrong out there, something really wrong." The man looked us over for a long moment. Then he sighed like he'd seen this before, or something like it. "Damn fools," he said. "Don't you know better than to camp here? Especially this time of year? Get in the truck. Now." His name was Ray. During the drive, he told us hunting stories. Normal hunting stories. About deer and bears and the time he tracked a 10-point buck for 3 days. He wasn't stupid. He could read the room. He knew we didn't need stories about things in the woods right now. He just filled the silence with something ordinary. We asked him to drop us at Tyler's house instead of town. Ray didn't ask questions. He just nodded and drove. We pulled up at 4:30 in the morning. The lights were on inside. Melissa and Brad were waiting on the porch, worried, confused. "You guys look like absolute crap," Melissa said. "Where have you been?" Tyler hesitated. "I fell in the creek," he said finally. "We got lost coming back. Where's your camping stuff?" "Still out in the woods. I'll get it tomorrow. Don't tell Mom or Dad." Melissa rolled her eyes. She didn't press it. She just went back inside. We thanked Ray. He nodded and drove away, and we watched his taillights disappear down the street. We trudged upstairs to Tyler's room and just collapsed on the floor. We didn't even try to get to beds. We just lay there, breathing, alive, here. "Way better than some sleeping bags in the woods," Tyler said after a long time. "Did that really just happen?" Ryan asked. "Did we eat some bad food or something?" I laughed. I actually laughed. It was the first time I'd laughed in hours, and it sounded insane. We passed out like that, all 4 of us on the floor of Tyler's room, exhausted, terrified, safe. When morning light started streaming through the window, I sat up slowly. Every muscle in my body ached. Tyler was snoring. Josh was curled near the door. I looked around the room trying to process what had happened, and then I realized something was wrong. Something was missing. I sat up slowly, every muscle screaming. The morning light was harsh through Tyler's window, turning everything pale and washed out. Tyler was snoring softly on his side. Josh was still curled near the door, one arm thrown across his face. I looked around the room, trying to process what had happened, trying to separate the real from the nightmare. And then I realized something was wrong. Something was missing. Kyle. My heart skipped. I scanned the room again, checking the corners, under the desk, behind the door. Nothing. I stood up, joints popping, and walked to the hallway. The bathroom door was open, empty. I came back and shook Josh awake. He groaned and squinted at me. "What time is it? Have you seen Kyle?" Josh sat up slowly, rubbing his face. "What do you mean? Where is he?" "I don't know. He's not in here." Tyler woke up at the sound of our voices. He lifted his head, confused. "What's going on?" "Kyle's gone," I said. Tyler sat up. He probably went home. His mom might have called or something, but that feeling came back, the wrong feeling from last night, the one that had followed us through the dark. "Let's call his house," I said. We went downstairs. Tyler had a landline in the kitchen. His hands were shaking slightly as he dialed. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, 4. Kyle's mother picked up on the 5th ring. "Hello? Hi, is Kyle home?" I asked. "Kyle, honey, Kyle's in bed. He's been asleep since last night. Is everything okay?" I froze. The words didn't make sense. They were English, but they weren't connecting. He's there at your house?" I managed. "Yes, he's been home all night. He had a really bad asthma attack yesterday evening, so I told him he couldn't go to Tyler's sleepover. He was pretty upset about missing it, but he needed to rest." The room tilted slightly. An asthma attack. Kyle had said nothing about an asthma attack. Kyle had been with us all night. We'd talked to him, eaten with him, run with him. "Ryan, are you there?" "Yeah, sorry. Can I talk to him? Sorry, he's still sleeping. It was a rough night. Can you call back later or come over sometime?" "Sure. Yeah, thank you. Bye." I hung up and turned to face Tyler and Josh. They were staring at me, waiting. "She says Kyle's been home all night. She says he had an asthma attack yesterday and couldn't come." Josh's face went pale. No, someone's messing with us. He was with us all night. We all saw him and talked to him and hung out." "I know," I said. Tyler was shaking his head. Was he lying? Was his mom lying? What was going on? The phone rang and all 3 of us jumped. Tyler answered it, listened for a moment, then said, "Yeah," and "cool," and "okay." His eyes were getting wider. He hung up after a few minutes and looked at us. "That was Kyle." "What did he say?" Josh asked. "He begged his mom to let him call us back after he knew we called, but he told me he'd been home all night." Josh stood up abruptly. "Oh, come on. Someone's messing with us. It's got to be Kyle." I shook my head. Could be. But why? Kyle has never pranked us before. He's not really like that. We decided to grill him Monday at school. For now, we tried to convince ourselves it had been a dream. Delirium. Something we'd eaten. Something we'd imagined together. The rest of the weekend stretched ahead of us like a reprieve, a chance to forget, to rationalize, to pretend. But the question remained, hanging in the air between us like smoke. Or was it 3 friends? Kyle didn't show up to school on Monday. We figured his asthma was worse than he'd said, that his mom was keeping him home to rest. We'd get answers eventually. We always did. But that day stretched on, each class feeling longer than the last. By lunch, we were checking our phones constantly, half expecting a text that never came. After school, we went to Tyler's house and waited. We thought maybe he'd call. Maybe his mom would let him come over once he felt better. We were stupid kids. We didn't know that Kyle was already gone. His mom found him that evening. He hadn't woken up from his nap, just stopped breathing sometime in the afternoon, his lungs finally giving out after years of fighting. An asthma attack in his sleep, the doctor said. No warning, no struggle. He was just gone. When Tyler's mom told us, I remember not understanding the words at first. They didn't make sense strung together like that. Kyle was dead. Kyle, who we'd just talked to on the phone. Kyle, who sounded normal and healthy and alive. The funeral was 3 days later. I'd never seen a dead body before. He looked like Kyle, but not like Kyle. Too still, too quiet. The casket was white, which seemed wrong somehow, like it should have been darker for a 13-year-old boy who'd spent his last night with us, or with something wearing his face. I never got to ask him. I never got to say, Kyle, were you really there? Were you at that campfire? Because if he was real, if that was actually him, then what killed him? What had we been running from? And if it wasn't him, If something else had been wearing his skin and laughing at our fear, then where had the real Kyle been the whole time? We started visiting his grave every week after that. Just the three of us, Tyler and Josh and me, sitting on the grass with our backs against the headstone, talking to him like he could hear us. We'd tell him about school, about girls we liked, about stupid things that happened in class. We were grieving the only way teenagers knew how, which was badly and incompletely, and with a desperate kind of hope that maybe he was still listening from somewhere. The cemetery became our place. It was quiet there, safe from the questions that adults kept asking us about that weekend, questions we couldn't answer because we didn't have answers. The visits became less frequent as we got older. Weekly turned into monthly. Monthly became yearly. Life did what life does. It moved forward whether we were ready or not. We graduated, went to college, started jobs and relationships, and built lives that didn't include regular trips to the cemetery. But I never stopped thinking about that night. Never stopped wondering. 23 years later, I still don't know what happened out there. I've had 2 decades to think about it, to analyze every moment, and I'm no closer to the truth than I was that Monday when we learned Kyle was dead. Was he at the campfire with us? Did we actually talk to him and eat with him and run alongside something that wasn't human? Or was Kyle lying in his bed the entire time, already sick, already dying, while his mother protected him from the outside world? And if he was lying in his bed, then who did we spend the night with? What did we see moving through those trees? Or was it 3 friends the whole time, and something else was the 4th? I just don't know. And I think that's what haunts me most. Not the fear, not the memory of those woods or that voice or the thing that chased us. It's the not knowing. It's the possibility that I'll never have an answer, that some mysteries don't get solved, that some questions follow you into adulthood and never let go. I want to thank you for listening to this, for sitting with me through all of it. The forests of Appalachia are full of